Racial reconciliation, the process of public acknowledgement of racist events and crimes, such as segregations and violence towards communities of color. But one may ask, what is this going to do? It's only acknowledgement. Well, let me break it down to you in a kid example. If I have a kid that is doing behavior that is not pleasing, I am likely to curb that kid's behavior because I want them to know that they're doing the wrong thing. Like knowing that for every $100 a white family has, a black family has $5.04 due to historical redlining. Or knowing that Tom and Jimal went to the same school, they had the same GPA and graduated at the same time and also applied for the same exact jobs. But Tom received 2 times the callbacks as his classmate Jimal due to implicit bias. So what I'm getting at here is when you know better, you can do better. And what we aim to do here is to bridge that gap with our hosts as they cover the topic racial reconciliation.
Today's discussion is around racial reconciliation, right? We hear the term racial reconciliation a lot these days. We hear about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now they've added on to that belonging, right? And sometimes it's a bit confusing on a number of perspectives because on one side of it, when you look at some of our Caucasian brothers and sisters, they don't think that there is, some of them don't think that there is a problem with race relations in our country, right? Mm-hmm. And then you look at some of our black and brown, all they see is, problems with racism and so forth. Last year, about a year ago now, I started what's called restorative racial reconciliation, right? And when I first came up with that, I was hosting people at my house from our community and bringing some of my black and brown friends from the city to have these very difficult conversations. And what I discovered is that for something to be restorative, it means that it's something that existed already, right? Mm-hmm. That it was a time and a place where it was in good standing. When you think about race relations, there was never a time in this country that I could think of where race relations was actually good for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. Either one side or another thought that things were good. In most cases, if you live, say for instance, if you grew up in the Barrington community where we live now, I could see very easily how people live in a bubble and not really experience sort of the complexities of race relations because they live in a bubble. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's not... It's like, well, there's not a problem. If you're watching Fox News all the time and you're just dealing with the people that look like you, sound like you, then you won't see that there's a problem. Life is good. Prime example, when the pandemic hit, we didn't experience in this particular area how everyone else did in the city when it came to the pandemic. There were the grocery stores, the restaurants still were functioning to some extent, right? I go in the city, go see mom. I can't even go any place to use the bathroom. Right. Like that's just that real. You know what I'm saying? So people then are forced to use the bathroom and thing outside. And so you would go through certain areas and you have to smell like, man, it smells like a commode out here. Like I'm real talk. Mm-hmm. However, but when you talk about racial reconciliation, for me, it's having those very difficult conversations until we can all understand how to have a conversation without being judgmental from all perspectives. So it was important to me that I brought people who were far right, those that sit in the middle, and then those that were far left, right? Because healing could only happen, or reconciliation can only happen when we're all present. So change can't happen if I'm segregated in my community and they're segregated in another community. So there's just us and them. So basically, racial reconciliation is about bringing everybody together and going through a journey. In New Zealand, there's a term that's called whakawhanangatanga. That means journeying life together, right? I know many of y'all heard that and thought, oh, wow, this dude is just cussing up a storm. But, it's called whakawhanangatanga. My kids love saying it because they think they can cuss in front of me.
Say that 3 times fast.
Whakawhanangatanga. No. No, for real though. So that's journeying life together.
Yeah.
There's not a night, most nights of the week in our house, there's someone at our table who don't look like us, who don't have the same experiences, and who have a different perspective. It's important to me through the journey of racial reconciliation that you become bilingual in culture, right? I think that we're limited when we don't have that perspective, or we haven't had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm bilingual, or when I'm diverse in my upbringing, it allows me the opportunities to go beyond my bubble. And when you don't have that, you don't experience that. But let's just talk for real for a moment. What have been your experiences when it comes to race relations? Have you ever felt like you were discriminated against, or have you ever been targeted by the police or anything like that?
Let's
talk about it. Let's talk about it.
I don't think what age do I even want to start with, right? Because I want to say my earliest experience, if I were to say just as far as like race relations, I want to say my earliest experience, I was like maybe 6 years old. Me and my family.
Wow, you can remember all the way back to 6 years old?
Just because of the experience, right? So I was about 6 years old. Me and my family were out in Wisconsin Dells or something like that. And it was me and my one of my guys, DeAndre. Shout out to you, my boy, wherever you at. I know where you at. But we were out in the Dells, and my parents like, you all go to the pool. We're gonna kind of chill upstairs. So me and DeAndre, we go downstairs and we go to this pool, and I'll never forget as we like entered like the threshold, like to where the pool area was. Of course, it's Wisconsin Dells, and I don't remember what time period, but it was nothing but like white people there. Yeah. And as soon as we walked through the door and we started heading to this pool, like people were getting out of the pool, and like they were pulling their kids out and so forth and so on. So that was like my first experience at maybe 6 or whatever it was.
Wow. So they literally pulled their kids out of the pool because you got in the pool.
Oh yeah, and at that time period, because you're younger, you don't really understand like what's going on. You understand, okay, something was weird, that was kind of crazy. Yeah. But yeah, that was the first experience.
That's interesting. So having grown up in the Austin community on the west side, and then my mom deciding to bust me out to a school that was predominantly white, but there were definitely a diverse group of ethnicities there, right? Yeah. So it taught me the value of diversity and the gift of being, comfortable and confident as a black man or a black young man. Yeah. And going into those environments. Now, as an adult, I take in legal guardianship of kids and bring them into this environment and give them the same sort of opportunity that my mom gave me. Now, of course, I was bussed in and out every day and realized that when I got back to the community, it was a whole different, environment back in the Austin community during that time than when I was at school. So now for my kids to have the opportunity to be in a different environment, yet be strong in their identity as young black and brown boys. Yeah. It does come with challenges in the times that we now live in, because you either what we find in the black community is like, oh my goodness, you transition into a community or suburb that is predominantly white, and then suddenly you forget where you come from. And so it's I call it forever grounding of my kids that you are not those Bel Air kids. Remember that. Remember where you come from and stay true to that, and not all of a sudden become privileged to the point where you can't eat leftovers. You know what I'm saying? Right. So I didn't even know that was such a thing. It's a balance thing. It's definitely a balance thing. I remember when I had I was bringing in some new kids into my house, and my old kids who had been with me for a few years said to me, "Are you letting them move into our house?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" "They're just so uncivilized." And I was like, "What?" Like they legit forgot how they were when they first came. And granted, the new ones were a bit more, ratchet than they were when they first came. Yeah. But the thought to think for them to say, well, they're just so uncivilized. First of all, I didn't even know you talked like that. And to the fact that you are now discriminating against your own kind because of the roughness that they've had to endure in their teen years. Yeah. Like, everybody deserves an opportunity, in my opinion. Yeah. But what I found out through racial reconciliation discussions is that even within the Black community,
Mm-hmm.
we have this thing called colorism, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, there were Black people who, because they were a lot lighter than the others, that they were allowed to go passing sometimes as whites. And then my boys call it, they call them the ones who were allowed in the house, and then those that were in the field picking cotton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it over time created this sort of communication where if you were lighter, that you were better.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same context that if you white means right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this video that's played of an experiment that took place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
Like
experiment,
Jane Addams or something like that?
yes,
Yeah.
where the kids, so
Got
the
the
kids,
doll.
yeah, they
Mhm.
came into the room. They had a Black kid,
Mhm.
I'd say all Black kids, and they had a Black doll and a white doll, and the kids had to choose which one they wanted,
Yep.
and then they told the reasons why they wanted that one.
Yep.
And 95% of the Black kids chose white dolls
Yep.
because they said that it was better, and that
Yeah.
the black dolls were bad.
Yeah.
And these were like third graders or something like that. They were not even teenagers or preteens. And just to think that how much our society has sort of indoctrinated our kids to believe that Black is bad.
Yeah.
Man, that was heartbreaking. Like for me, like it literally brought me to tears that our kids as young as 3 years old are thinking like, man, because I'm Black, I'm no good. And so,
But if you think about it though, right? Like if we look at I want to say like the spectrum of like Blackness,
Mhm.
it's so limited,
Mhm.
right? Like I think that's why like shows like Insecure
Mhm.
like did really well because they showed a completely different dynamic of like Black people. Because I can remember as far as I want to say I was like a teenager, right?
Mhm.
Like all you know is a certain type of Black person.
Mhm.
You know, like I didn't know anything about educated, elite,
Yeah.
white Black people with money. Like it's not everybody's from the hood, and we all think this way, we talk this certain way,
Yeah.
like we all live this certain way.
Mhm.
So I think I don't want to kind of blame it on the media,
Mhm.
but I think obviously when you only have this limited lens of what Blackness looks like, not black and right or wrong, but just Blackness looks this one way.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for you to kind of step outside of it or know
Mm.
anything other than that, you know?
Yeah.
Let alone identify with it.
Yeah. So what do you?
Because real quick, let's think about it, right?
Mhm.
If we were to go back to where we came from,
Mhm.
right? And I was to bring a couple of guys, I know a couple of guys, you know, right? They will probably see
Mhm.
the life you're living now, right?
Mhm.
Like this entire area, like,
Mhm.
like how was that even possible?
Yeah.
Like you're like a unicorn, right? Because of just the limited perspective
Mhm.
that we get, you know.
Mhm.
So
Or they would quite naturally think, if they didn't know my story, they
Right.
would quite naturally think drugs is involved.
Right.
Because in order
it's a
for
lot of drugs. I'm telling you right now, you out here listening. It's a lot of drugs. Okay.
there was something that was not right. Like
Yeah.
I got there in a sketchy way. Like
Yeah.
that you couldn't have had a journey like this.
Yeah.
But it goes back to redefining who we are as a people, and obviously telling the stories of Black excellence as opposed to always highlighting the things that seem to plague our communities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, what would you say is a means to an end for our people?
When you say it means to an end, what you mean?
Like how do we overcome that? How do we how do we change the narrative? Because
Yeah.
I obviously have some ways. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I'm changing the narrative for the next generation
Yeah.
by taking in disadvantaged Black and brown boys,
Yeah.
bringing them into my house,
Yeah.
giving them a different experience.
Yeah.
And the big thing about that, and people I think sometimes take for granted, is that when you have access to a network of people, that literally breaks the cycle right
Yep.
there. Because when you can walk into a room or you have a need,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just say, hey, just call such and such, automatically it
Yeah.
changes. My boys now in high school already doing apprenticeships and figuring out what they want to become now, right?
Right.
In high school.
Right.
Because I realized that the fact that the moment that you could determine what you want to be in life and you can connect that, the earlier you connect that,
Mhm.
then you're going to put that work in that's required to go through your process of your education. And then you're not going to take for granted the opportunities that you have in front of you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how can we magnify that on a larger scale across the country?
So that's a great question. I think that obviously picking back off of what you just mentioned as far as the access. That's a very simple way to do it, right?
Yep.
I think there needs to be more platforms like what we're talking about now, because I know with my generation, entrepreneurship is common, right? Like it's expected in the sense that, like I was talking to my mom a while back, and like growing up in the 70s, like someone running their own business was rare, right? It was like you either had to work somewhere for maybe 20 years and you just go off on your own and that sort of thing. But my point, if you will, is that I think living in the time that we do now, I think highlighting and showing more entrepreneurs and people are on that journey and showing them an alternative, and really like really shining a light in a very intentional way, having more platforms, wherever they may be, shining a light on these things will definitely open people's perspectives up that we're more than entertainers and athletes.
Yes.